When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Your coworker is late to the meeting again. They're so selfish, you think. But when you're late, it's because traffic was terrible, your kid was sick, or your previous meeting ran over time. This tendency to explain others' behavior by their character, while explaining our own circumstances more charitably, is called the fundamental attribution error. Another fancy way to say this is motive attribution asymmetry, and it's a major source of interpersonal and political conflict. Social psychologist Lee Ross identified this pattern in some research in the 1970s. When we see somebody cut us off in traffic, we assume they're a jerk. We don't consider they might be rushing to the hospital. But for ourselves, we always have good reasons. This attribution asymmetry wreaks havoc in relationships. Your partner forgets to pick up the milk because they're thoughtless. You forgot because you're overwhelmed with work. These character judgments accumulate, creating narratives about who people really are, that become self-fulfilling prophecies. And history is littered with these attribution errors. The poor were seen as morally deficient rather than disadvantaged. Mental illness was attributed to weak character rather than biology. Individualistic societies like the United States show stronger fundamental attribution error than more collectivist cultures, which emphasize more situational factors. This creates misunderstandings in multicultural teams where the same behavior gets interpreted through different attribution lenses. This error, of course, shows up in politics too. Supporters attribute their candidates' mistakes to circumstances or to the other side, throwing mud and mudslinging, while seeing their opponents' mistakes as character flaws or evidence of evil. This same policy success is either personal triumph or favorable conditions, depending on your political affiliation. Overcoming this bias requires conscious perspective taking. Before judging someone's character, ask, what situational factors might explain this? When someone frustrates you, imagine defending their behavior to a neutral third party. This doesn't mean excusing bad behavior or tolerating abuse, but understanding its origins can help us respond more effectively. In disagreements, explicitly discussing situational factors can diffuse character attacks and refocus on solving problems rather than just assigning blame. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Chris Lundberg. Chris is a professor of communication at the University of North Carolina, a pastor, and a corporate and political consultant. Chris, tell us an argument story.
Well, I was going to start with one of my favorite confrontations, which I believe happened at the University of Southern California in like 1997 when you challenged the Redlands basketball team to a 3-on-3 contest. But the argument was settled there.
That didn't happen.
The argument was settled there. No, man, thanks for having me on. Podcast is fantastic. Like, I love the work you're doing. As always, I've had strong personal admiration for you. I don't know, like, there's a big theme. Here's a small example, the small theme. I was helping to do curriculum reform at UNC. And the goal was to figure out what students needed to learn to be better citizens. And I remember very distinctly an argument I had with a colleague of mine who I admire, who's in another department, I won't say, a kind of general humanist type. And we got to this impasse where I was like, look, whatever content we teach people, they need to learn how to talk, listen, and think about evidence. And he was like, if we don't know the specifics of it, historian, so I'll out him. Those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it. And what I found to be so weird about that argument is a bigger thing that I'm real invested in these days, which is, what do people know to be better citizens, need to know to be better citizens? And like, what stuff do we focus on? And that's not, so I've had like versions of this argument over and over and over now with lots of different constituencies, and it's really it sticks with me as your prompt says, because I wonder why it's so tough to figure out what we need to do to learn to talk to each other better.
Let's start with the first one. You and this unnamed historian, your position is basically students should be taught how to talk, listen, and think about evidence in a more constructive, nuanced way. how do we get what's true and how do we measure it out and how do we associate risks with that? This has a higher risk of being true than that. This person says, no, you got to get into the weeds and know the specifics, go into the archives and talk about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, or whatever version of that. Yep.
And then, but your position, I presume, because I to put cards on the table, happen to share your position. Your retort is, well, how do you know what the specifics are if you don't know how to evaluate the evidence first?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think, if you talk to anyone in any discipline at a university or any expert in anything, and you say, hey, how do we solve this problem? It's, the old, to hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so I found for as many people as I've talked to about this problem, surprisingly, everybody feels like you need to master their subject matter area to figure out how to have a conversation about the issues that flow from it. So people in the sciences are like, well, gosh, you got to understand math and scientific method to really have a meaningful argument about, I don't know, vaccination or whatever. People in history are like, you got to understand the broad partisan trends that have made up American politics if you really want to meaningfully engage politics. And the funniest part was in almost every instance, people say, you're arguing against learning the specific thing that I want to teach you in favor of something abstract and weird. And I always kind of say, like, the question's not what specific content people need to learn to be better at disagreement. I think the question is also just maybe we should also learn how to disagree.
Really speaking to the choir on this show. Glad you found your way here.
No, I've been paid a lot of money. Well, no, but the way I always say it is like, my son's learning to play basketball.
Yeah.
Because he wants to repeat the same success his dad had in Southern California over my league.
Oh, man.
And so, the weird analogy is like, if I want him to learn basketball, I don't give him a biography of Dr. Naismith. I don't tell him to go to a class where he learns kinesthetics and the neuropsychological linkages between the brain and coordination. I take him to the foul line and I have him shoot.
Right.
And I think that's, I know that's something that's big for you too, but for all the different places where we're fighting about the role that the university has in making better citizens, I think we're spending a ton of time having people learn background and theory and definitions in very little time, really learning how to do the rough and tumble of argument.
Really practicing the skill set. And to your point, I mean, the metaphor I always go for is it's sort of a container, communication excellence and evidence analysis is a container. It sort of depends on what content you put into it, into the vase, into the jug. But it does await kind of specific content, but it's applicable in all these different environments, ranging from basketball to vaccinations to dung beetles and you name it. The larger issue
at your house, it's probably a vase. At my house, it's jugs and dung beetles.
It's a vase. It's a vase.
That's right.
And you use this as a springboard into a larger kind of passion project, what should good citizens focus on? What should good communicators focus on? And so flipping this back in your direction, what should they do? What's your alternative to content specific knowledge and becoming an expert in a thing?
I just came back like 2 days ago from this big conference at the AEI and the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg Center. And it was the goal of the conference is to get together all the like hot folks in civic thought. I'm not one of them, but somehow I kind of, got myself on the agenda. And what I noticed was there's like three schools of thought. So there's one group of folks who are like, gosh, you need to read the founders. You need to read our Constitution. You need to understand our institutions. And once you understand all that stuff, the rest of American life will make sense to you. Like good citizens will spontaneously emerge. I'll call that one the 1776 project.
Okay.
And then there's the kind of 1619 project version too, which is like, you need to really see the exclusions in democracy, see the inequities that have, kind of shaped American life. And so, having some sense of the shaky ground that democracy is built on, well, that'll fix us. And then there's a bunch of folks that I think essentially are, about politeness. They're like, we need civil discourse, and civil discourse is polite discourse, which, by the way, is a definition that I vehemently disagree with. But yeah, so those are the three. What do I think they should do? I think ultimately I want people to have common ideas, common practices, and common means of resolving problems in the context of American democratic life. And that means you need enough of a sense of the things that animate different people and parties in American democracy. You need enough of a commitment to the idea that the institutions, though flawed, are decent in keeping us together over long periods of time, so you don't quit when you don't get what you want. And then you need like basically to be able to hear things charitably and respond in a way that, you know, charitably engages the substance of the argument instead of making it about, you know, the joy of the fight. And that's one weird thing that I think that we haven't really grappled with, is that I think we're in a culture where we prove arguments by pointing to who doesn't agree with them. When the right people disagree, an argument is good. And we largely see arguments as kind of wars of position instead of ways of learning things. So we need to learn that last part, I think. You know, like that opinion is not the ending point, it's a starting point. And we need to charitably engage opinion as a starting point for coming to know things together.
I think there's kind of, it seems like at least the way you sketch these 1776 project, the 1619 project, and then I think implicitly the position you're defending, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the world is very complex and that it's difficult to say that there is this kind of great resounding truth in any one version of the past, the present, or the future. And the question is, how are we going to continue to coexist and understand which path we should take amidst those complexities with a total lack of black and white? And with that implies a certain set of skills and a certain set of relationship management strategies and tactics, and a certain sense of humility about what you can know and lack of certainty about what you already know. But the way that you sketched it, at least, and one of the resounding kind of fears I've had is, okay, well, these content-specific experts have a value system, and what I'm recommending in terms of civil discourse or civility or respect or whatever it is more or less a method, right? But what am I defending, and why am I defending this method?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, one way I put it is, the funniest thing is somehow at one point we learned not only that opinion was a possession as opposed to a starting point for us figuring out who's right, what's right. But if you think about it, we think it's a huge moral victory when we train people to get to a point of dispute and say, okay, agree to disagree. You know, like, and it's just like relevant cultural knowledge that it's a good outcome for us to agree to disagree. I think that's tragic, because my understanding of the kind of roots of democracy are that we disagree to agree, that we stake out differences in interest, perspective, and opinion, and then we kind of work through them. And so, you know, I say the same thing to the read the founders people, to the figure out structural inequities people, to the be nice and polite people, which is all three of those things are right. You know, like, having a knowledge of the founding principles of the Republic is crucially important. Even having an American identity, I think, is crucially important, something that ties us together. Is it crucially important to also see the structural inequities built into it? Yeah. And should we be nice at all when it's at all possible? Yes. But, you know, your point, I think, is absolutely right. What we need is a framework for saying we can recognize the value of all those interventions, and we can still say that, like, at root, the modern university has done a terrible job of teaching students how to think and speak and resolve arguments. Very, very rare exceptions. You know, I mean, obviously, including yourself, that's something that you focus on. And there are lots of folks who are doing it, but it's funny how quickly the kind of blocking and tackling, the concrete stuff that's the day-to-day of democratic life drops out of the curriculum.
Well, and to the point about your opinion as a possession, and it is an expression of your authentic self. And so for me to deny your opinion is a kind of violence against your person, really gets in the way of the kind of blocking and tackling that you and I are both committed to. And one of the issues...
My opinion is that you're wrong on that, Mike. So conversation settled, turn off podcast.
I am going to end this session as quickly as I possibly can. And with that in mind, I would say... I wonder, and this is an issue that I deal with all the time, which is, okay, well then how do you do the blocking and tackling at a scale required to make an appropriate or impactful cultural intervention? In other words, to teach people the kinds of respect, humility, curiosity, etc., to sort out a very complicated world and not retreat to psychologically secure, but really ineffectual coalitional positions about what is absolutely true and what is absolutely authentic. And so what the show is sort of there trying to do this work at scale. Some of the other trainings and dialogues we do, we're trying to do it at scale. But some pessimistic part of me thinks it's very easy to radicalize into certainty, into blacks and whites at scale. And the remedies are all one-to-one, one person with a small group, relationally, you and I. And so it's hard to mop up the floor as the water is still flowing in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mostly agree.
Yeah.
So I guess my way of thinking about it is, I think professors are nerds, and I love being a nerd. But one of the things about being a nerd is, over time, you're kind of taught that the main model for pedagogical intervention is you take an idea in your head that you've gotten from some great literature or wherever, and you transmit it to individual students, and then you observe the individual student doing the thing, and you tell them they did a good job or didn't do a good job. There's the intro lecture, and then there's the seminar where you let them kind of test stuff out a little bit.
Yeah.
I actually think we could do a lot more, and I know you're behind this and working on this. If we don't see our only means of advancing democratic culture as being modeling or exposure. So most folks say, like, hey, if we bring some speakers to campus and model it for other people, well, holy cow, the kids will learn what to do. Or, if we expose them to other ideas, they'll just say, oh, hey, I never heard that other idea before, and I'll change my mind. And of course, like, with the data say that doesn't work. So I think one of the things to do is to focus on practices and capacities. So when I talk about how to set up curriculum for this, one of the big things that I think is, you train students in the basic outlines of a specific kind of speaking situation. So it could be public speech, could be a debate, could be a pitch, could be a stakeholder simulation, whatever. And you give them the duty to perform as close as they can to those guidelines, but you also give them the obligation, the responsibility to respond to other folks and say what they've seen that's good, what they saw that struck them poorly, etc. And then I think you empower students or even groups to do a lot of the teaching. So it's not on the professor or the workshop facilitator. It's, one of the best ways to learn is to competently set up a series of processes that invite people to reflect on their experience and to feed back what the experience was for them as they heard from other people. So it doesn't completely solve the scale problem, but it does help in that I think it's not just about the model of the individual master professor teaching the Padawan about what are the best means of communication, and instead empower people with processes and practices, and then give them the opportunity to reflect on them together, and then teach them that it's not about mastery of any one practice. I don't care. I mean, I like it when kids learn how to debate or be good at public speaking or be good in a stakeholder simulation or a deliberation, but I don't really care individually. What I care about is that they thought about how they're a different person in each one of those contexts. And the goal, I think, has to be to start kind of developing a capacity for judgment. I mean, one of my, if you want a great editorial, I just read about this the other day in the Seattle Times. Really, really good. Came out on Sunday. Andy Perrin, Chris Lundberg. It's called "We Think We Know How to Teach Students How to Do Democracy,
okay.
Don't," or something like that.
I love the promotion. Let's get it in.
Yeah, right. Woohoo! Hit those comments. They're really good. The funniest part was, so it's this essay that kind of makes a version of the argument I'm making now. And the funniest thing was, all the comments say, yeah, that's what you're saying is sort of right, but we can just never fix this problem because of the other side. It's like, it's the exact opposite of the idea that we're trying to, I hope, inculcate in people, that you say, I only have responsibility for what I say and do, and how I interact with other folks, and the kinds of processes I engage in set up. So I do think it's a tough scalar problem. The other thing is, I don't want to overrun here, but Ron Daniels wrote this great book, What a Universities Owe Democracy. And one of the funniest things about that book is he's like, we need to train people in pluralism. And he has all kinds of suggestions for that. He basically thinks that was taken care of for the first 100 years of the American university by student debate clubs.
Yeah.
So, like, that's another thing, is it's not just something we have to do in the classroom. It's also, you need a cultural intervention that says we can learn to disagree, and in fact, disagreement is productive, and to disagree is respectful, and evaluate evidence, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
But I think it's also, and it's about changing how we do teaching so that it's not just teaching people theories and concepts, but putting them into practice and kind of supporting those, I don't know,
Yeah,
academic,
that's right.
para-democratic student organizations. Because what
Co-curricular.
else? Yeah, because what else do we got? I mean,
But yeah,
that's the
that's
basic thing.
yeah, you and I agree on that, and that's the point where I sort of think of the university as the initial point of a coiling, widening circle of potential impact. Right, it starts theoretically in the classroom, starts theoretically in these kinds of relationships, and then widens to co and paracurricular activities, whether it's debates or bringing in speakers or campus events, workshops, dialogue, and then it involves retirement centers, community radios, public libraries, corporations, government, state governments, and the like, and then widens into the kind of national conversation about our hopeful, collective, peaceful, but sometimes antagonistic coexistence. And also emphasizes to really, I think, put a finer point than is deserved on what you were saying, which is more learning by doing and less learning by listening or presumed osmosis. I mean, the example I give all the time, to go back to your endless and tiresome basketball analogy, is about you can listen to me all day long talk about dribbling a basketball, and then let's give you one and let you see you do it in the lane. And those are two very different kinds of animals.
Or just see how easily I ripped it from you at the top of the key. I mean, that no, I think that's absolutely right, and it's a frustrating position. It's not just the kind of culmination of building individual capacities. I think, funnily enough, I'd characterize a lot of these university civility and discourse programs as basically private communication instead of public communication. Like, you need to discipline yourself. You need to think about how, whether or not you're being mean, you need to think about why it's better to be a better democratic friend than you'd otherwise be. Making it public means there's a different level of intervention, building things into student life activities, into curriculum, all that stuff you said, I think is exactly right. And ... I think one of the biggest problems with the easy solution in our context is that basically one of the great things about being a communication person, and maybe this is me seeing everything as a nail because I'm a hammer, but one of the things I love about it, I'm totally willing to admit to that possibility. One of the things I love about it, though, is that you got to distinguish not only between like process and content, but I think you need to think about the difference between an individual position and or an institutional position and the kind of larger, I'll say it in nerd, cultural ecology of the argument. And what I mean by that is, so what I mean by that is like, what I've seen out of most of these civics programs, whether it be whatever flavor it is that they say, look, the only way you can restore American democratic life is for you to learn X kind of content. And weirdly enough, instead of that becoming an opportunity for us to all talk about what different X's should be included, it has, in very real terms, made the fight over civic education as polar, if not more polar, than our national discourse. Because the folks on the kind of read the founders and learn the nice basis of liberal political philosophy side are like, what's wrong with these structural inequity people? That's all identity politics. And the structural inequity people are like, well, what's wrong with these, people who are doing white identity politics when they say you just got to read the founders? And the politeness people are like, why are you fighting so much? Can't we all just get along and agree on a common goal? And, at least for me, again, hammer nail problem, but like the essence of civic discourse, and especially of civil discourse, is not a specific way of conducting yourself or a specific thing to talk about. It is, to recover the old kind of Roman and Greek concept, a means of speaking for the good of the city. Or John Dewey said, no conversation is intrinsically public. It only becomes public as soon as when you and I are talking, we talk about the effects of something on someone else. And so, like, to me, that's the big shtick, is that we're at big risk of making the conversation about how to fix our democracy more partisan than the democracy itself in some ways.
We could certainly play into that vortex without a doubt. And as we close, I would like to end on a hopeful note, which is, where, as you scan the culture and scan these kind of three options as you've laid them out, where do you see the most hope for the birth of a kind of robust dialogue and debate, democratic public sphere? What kinds of efforts or initiatives, books, editorials in the Seattle Times? Where are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful for things like this podcast because it's got
great answer,
right? But it does. It has an ethos where you say, just let folks say what they're going to say, and I'm not going to grill them as much as I'm going to try and understand where they're coming from, and let the folks in the audience kind of sort out what they agree with and don't agree with. But like, more to the point, that's the funny thing about democracy. I am perennially, maybe it's the pastoral part in me, I am perennially not optimistic but hopeful for democracy. There's this, there's this awesome old distinction in theology. A number of folks talked about it. Eric Fromm, non-theologian, also talked about it. Who cares who else talked about it? Anyway, there's a difference between hope and optimism. Barack Obama cited this too. Optimism is the idea that, in this case, that if we really firmly believe in our democratic foundations, things will inevitably get better, because that's the character of America. Hope is the idea that the world is messed up. Pastoral part of me would say the world has fallen. And hope is in the idea that if and when we commit ourselves alongside other people to making the world different, there are real possibilities. And so I want to say, in some sense, like, as long as folks aren't saying the other methods are bad and are open to the idea that we're all hacking at a kind of common set of things, which is about democratic behaviors of listening, talking, arguing, and resolving things together, then all of the different things people are trying, whether it's reading the founders, thinking about inequity, trying to be more polite, doing student debate clubs, doing community deliberations, all those things have substantial nascent promise. And it's just a question of us. I think the core thing is to reestablish that kind of higher principle of what it means when we listen and what it means when we talk. And to me, the core principle behind that is, I am the person that I am. I believe the things that I believe. I am made by the community around me. I only become a human in front of other humans, and vice versa. And if that's the case, the question's not, am I right? The question is, what can we be together? And you can't ever just surrender the am I right, but you can put at the forefront what can we be together as a means of instilling hope in the durability of the democratic project. Thus saith I.
Can we be together is a great question to conclude with. Chris Lundberg, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree, and I'll see you on court.
See you on court, my friend. Good to talk.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.